Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And welcome everybody to the KAKT American Knowledge Team meeting today. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Of course, it's all relative. It all depends on where in the world you are. But you're here, and so welcome.
We see your screen and your audio is coming over perfectly.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, and here we go. Please have a little fun today. This is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We have been discussing advanced transition. Today will be the Coulomb barrier. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is August 18th, 2024. This is the KAKT Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. The Advanced Transition Series is a continuation of other advanced series. And please understand, these are just basic public teachings. And it gives us an opportunity to really get into some more meat. But as you can see, we are in the 6th of this series, which means it's the last one. And so it is going to be a little bit involved, but that's okay. We're still condensing thousands of hours of teaching into a few short lessons. But as we said, we want to have some fun because we need to get off this hesitancy highway. We have to understand that we have to talk to other people. There are a lot of new knowledge seekers that are coming, and we're the ones who have the experience and the expertise. And also, we need to do it our way. We need to be able to put the information forward correctly, but we need to be able to do it in a way that we understand, because we're the ones who are front and center wherever you are. And wherever you are right now is the lowest energy state. And it's a pretty hard state. And so they say life is hard until you get up on the horse. And this is where we know that bulls walk, but horses, however, might even fly. And this is a good thing because there are many ways to overcome barriers. And boy, we sure have a lot of barriers. One of them is the Coulomb barrier. And of course, that's named after Coulomb's law, which is named after Mr. Coulomb. And this is an energy barrier due to electrostatic interaction that two nuclei need to overcome so that they can get close enough to undergo a nuclear reaction. that is the new definition coming out of our favorite sources. And as we understand, there are other sources of information, and they're in outer space, and we're still searching for outer space. And as today is the Advanced Transitioning series, that's what we're doing. We're transitioning across the universe on the plasma highway to our little pie in the sky. And why do we always settle for that little piece of pie? Why can't we go for the whole pie? Well, there are reasons. It's all ingrained in the Coulomb barrier. So trying to break the Coulomb barrier, the books by Marin Tabakoli-Kesh, book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matters. It explains how matter is created and is brought together with 3 dimensions. And of course, once you have the one matter, you have to have another matter, because otherwise, where are you going? And so the book number 2, The Structure of the Light. Amazing, eh? I didn't know that light had structure, but it does have a structure, and it is ingrained in the Coulomb's barrier. Then, of course, there's book number 3, The Origin of the Universe, which somehow we have man's universe and we have a sister universe, and these are distinctly 2 different universes, and they have distinct Coulomb barriers. So what we've been trying to do is to figure out how to join the universal community. We cannot do that without world peace. So for 339 weeks in a row, the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for Justice and World Peace is brought to you by Rick Raman and the Universal Council, is discussing these matters, which has to do with fundamental issues of morality and ethos. And so I was brought up with 10 commandments, and these 10 commandments from Moses were pretty good. Actions speak louder than words, however. And there are other commandments that we've discussed. So we find that we've been cherry picking our commandments to suit our purpose. So how do we get on that plasma highway? How do we elevate ourselves to get on that plasma highway? Well, here we are completing the transition highway. The transition highway was distinctive from the transmission highway because the transmission highway was the lowest energy state. So that's what we've been doing. We've been trying to get on this transition highway and to understand it a little bit better. And of course, we have to understand that, none of us are really and truly scientists of the caliber of Mr. Kesh. But then there are other scientists out there and they don't get it either. And there's a reason for it, and it has to do with man-made barriers. Because, when we want that little piece of the MAGRAPH pie chart, one of the things that keeps coming out is that the speed of light is a constant transmission. This is a pretty significant point. And we've been trying to figure out how can something that has a constant transmission have a variable transition, because there are different colors, and including, of course, that there are no colors. And so we'll be discussing that shortly in the future. And the other thing, of course, is that many people believe that the universe is 99% hydrogen. We can never give it full credit, right? So that must mean that the rest of the universe is just garbage. And this is what you do. When you don't understand something, you throw it away. And then you have to wonder where away is, because you are here or you are here. And if you keep throwing stuff away, maybe away is here. And it gets confusing because we never know where we are. And what's even more confusing is we don't know where we came from, because here we come 2 forces coming together, which is the fundamental principles of plasma science. And as they come together with the forces of attraction, they create the X and Y axis dimension. And so that becomes our transmission and transition dimension. And not only do they come together, but they keep coming together, and more keep coming together. So this is how we grow. And in that process, it grows and grows and grows. And then, of course, we have the principal universal line maths, which are magnetic field forces coming together. So we see the whole universe and how it all comes together from the beginning with the principal matter. And yet it seems to have a boundary, it seems to have a barrier, and it seems to have a center point, and it seems to have a GANs of connection where we see the central principal mass coming through the equator line, and then the rest of the mass coming to the outside. So what is really important to note here is that this follows the principles of magnetical and gravitational field forces interacting. And we know what that is. That's a maggrav. So when we're looking at a plasma, we have to understand that whatever that is, to be in existence, it has to have a magnetical and a gravitational interaction. You need both. And not only do you need both, but as we see with our Earth, we have two rotating hemispheres. So each hemisphere has a magnetical gravitational interaction. And then collectively, the two together have a magnetical gravitational interaction. And this has to be distinct and individual because we have a north hemisphere and a southern hemisphere, and they rotate in opposite directions. And this is kind of confounding because the Earth itself rotates in one direction, and both hemispheres rotate in the same direction. So as we've migrated from the basic teaching to understand the x-axis transmission of rotation, the y-axis transition of polarity, the z-axis transmutation of field strength, we find that in the transmission dimension, we have to have an x, y, and z axis in order to have a complete dimension. And that doesn't state which transmission dimension we're talking about. So there are other transmission dimensions. And in order to go from one to the other, we have to go through a transition dimension. And that's what we're talking about. Now we're talking about the advanced transitions. And so each axis also has to be able to go through a transition. And so what we see in conclusion here is that we can have a transmission dimension at a lower energy state, and we can have a transmission dimension at a higher energy state. And the connection between those two energy states is a transition. But that transition has to incorporate the three dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis. And what we haven't been able to discuss is how do we determine which transition dimension are we talking about? Because there's more than one. And which transmission dimension are we going to? Oh, because there's more than one. And then if we're coming to one and going from another one, or going to another one and coming from one, it means that the creation of the universe comes from energy in motion. And so the universe is created from and exists from energy, and energy is always in motion. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about charge, a charge in motion. It tells us which direction we're going. But not only that, it tells us which dimension we're going, interacting with, and it's also influencing our transition from dimension to dimension. And what we find now is that we can straddle different dimensions. And so what has been limiting our understanding, notwithstanding the one dimension in our physical state is bound by the Coulomb barrier. So how do we straddle different dimensions? And where does this energy come from? So what is energy in the physical state? Well, that is sugar energy. And so we find in chemistry that there's a pentagonal magnetical field and a hexagonal gravitational field. And as we flip the poles back and forth to exchange energy, we find that it creates a twisting susceptibility. And then, of course, it creates a coiling, but that coiling cannot be just in one dimension. That's just a pattern template. So we have this spherical growth that grows in all dimensions. And it's very hard to describe that in a two-dimensional picture. But what we have to understand is that there will be a three-dimensional effect. And as such, when we put it in a package like water, we find that that's a nice parcel. And that parcel is a maggrav. It's balanced between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. So in the water, we say that the hydrogen is magnetical and the oxygen is gravitational. But we know by mass that the hydrogen is teeny tiny and the oxygen is really, really big. And how does it stay balanced? And even in that balanced state, how to come it's round? So there's a lot of other things that we have to take into consideration. And then we also have to understand that there's a constant energy shifting where we shear the electrons off through one way or another, whether it's chemically, biologically, or through a nuclear reaction. And so this energy is looking for a partner, and it leaves behind a hydroxyl, which now, because we've lost some energy, which is positive, means the hydroxyl is a negative, and as a negative, it's a seeker. And so it's looking to marry something else. And so with this process, we find that water is a universal solvent of life. And in that process, this energy has to cross over somehow, or it gets deflected somehow. And in the coming together, it can create a twisting, as we discussed with sugar. And that twisting can involve a tightening, a coiling, or in as a result, a form artifact of tunneling. And so these are all packaged in a parcel, an energy parcel. And inside that energy parcel, well, there was the energy packs within a parcel. And these are always in motion. And so this may be confusing because for years, advanced scientists like Richard Feynman, very good scientist, I might add, but he had this electron fixation problem. And of course, that has set us down a wrong road. And it was reinforced with the theory of positrons. And where it talks about the annihilation of particles and antiparticles. But these are in pairs. And so there's the eventual creation, and there's an eventual annihilation of pairs, which may occur now and then, And there, of course, there's no creation and there's no annihilation, only change of directions. And so that change of direction becomes movement from the past to the future or from the future to the past. That doesn't really explain how the Earth is rotating, does it? And that doesn't really explain how the planets are rotating out around the sun. And that doesn't really explain how the Milky Way is constantly turning. And that doesn't explain how we move, because we don't have extension cords sticking out from us. And of course, there's no motor driving the planets. So how do we capture these fields? And so we find that there's a transition, and it comes not only the x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension, but it fulfills the z-axis dimension. So at that point now, we have created a field, but that field is moving. So that means it's changing position. Well, what is causing the difference in that position? And what happens with that field? Well, interestingly enough, we've been able to create plasma light. And so that becomes a manifestation of light from a GANS state. And those of you who have been paying attention, and you have to pay close attention, understand that the GANS light does not cast a shadow. And of course, the energy comes from within. And of course, we've been talking about GANSes for a long, long time. And so we see the structure of the GANSes, where we have the positive core and the negative outer shell. The negative representing the magnetosphere, and the core representing the gravitational field forces converging into the center. And then, of course, now that we have equipment that is capable of going beyond the nanostate, GANS is a gas as a nanosolid, but we now have the capability of even going down to the picostate. And so we can see that there are many points of light. But these lights are natural light. And the interesting point is that they are within our Coulomb barrier. And so our Coulomb barrier involves the z-axis dimension, which is the rotation, the y-axis dimension, which is the rotation around the polarity. And then, of course, the z-axis dimension is the interdependence of the y-axis and z-axis interaction, which creates the spherical rotation. And then, of course, we see the motion. Now, let's understand that this motion is the motion that we see on this planet. That sounds like an obvious statement. You're driving a car. You end up most of the time on the ground. And you should end up with the wheels on the ground. So whatever you're driving is within the Coulomb barrier. And so wherever you're going, you're moving from one position to another, and there's some kind of reference. And we've been using the potentiation of hydrogen as a reference because we can see that there's an energy transfer, and we can see the scale going from 1 to 14, and it involves a transmission of energy. But each point on the scale represents a different kind of stability or instability, and it's a reflection of susceptibility. And there's a relationship between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. And the potentiation of hydrogen, of course, involves oxygen as well, because the pH scale is representative of water, actually. And so water involves hydrogen and oxygen. But that scale is up to 14. And it is rigid. It is a fixed scale. That scale is based on integers, and 1 being the lowest and 14 being the highest. And so when we split the water, we find that the pH always totals 14. And so we have to understand that a pH of 7 for acidic water is blended with a pH of 7 for alkaline water. So 7 and 7 is 14. And so if we treat the neutral position as a zipper, which means that if we drop down one layer and we have a pH of 6, we will automatically create a balanced pH of 8. 6 and 8 is 14. 9 and 5 is 14. 4 and 10 is 14. And this is how we do the y-axis transition to facilitate the x-axis transmission. But we don't discuss how do we go from one pH to another. And I'm really sorry about that, because we're still talking about our potentiation layers. So the pH scale becomes a zipper transmission, and then the peaks and valleys of the y-axis transition allows us to have the pH transition. And we find, say, a peak of 4 and a peak of 10 is 14, and a valley of 5 and a valley of 9 is 14. But we need this up and down motion because it reflects the balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces. So at the peak, it's very magnetical, and at the trough, it's very gravitational. But we have all these transition points in between. So within the pH of 4, we have all of these transition points. But then there's this massive transition going from 4 to 5. And it looks like a scale of 1, but we know it's an order of magnitude, which means it's 10. And then as we go, there's a relationship between the magnetical acidity and the gravitational alkalinity. And the gravitation reflects density. So the y-axis density transition is actually a balancing. So if you have 5, you'll have 9. And if you have 4, you'll have 10. And if you have the GANS of 1, you will have to offset it with the GANS of another. And so we know where the GANSes come from, because we've all made the cups of life, and we needed to do that because we remember they weren't the cups of the pandemic, but they got us through. And in that process, we took physicality, and that physicality, by structuring it in a certain way involving a nanocoding process of monatomic science, we brought in the GANSes. And one cup is an emotional GANS, and the other cup is a physical GANS. But we also brought in other GANSes. So we can have a GANS radiance manifestation of all the elements on the periodic table of elements, including gold. So not just carbon dioxide or calcium or zinc or copper, and very importantly, amino acid and water. And so if we look at the relationship between the water and the amino acid, then we could say that the water is gravitational and the amino acid is magnetical. And we can also say that the emotional first cup is magnetical and the physical cup is gravitational. So we can also say that the lower part in the y-axis transition scale, the atomic physicality is gravitational. And the next layer up is nanocoding, which is monatomic. And then the next layer up is the gas as a nanosolid. And these are all part of matter state, what we call small m matter state because it's physical. But as we transition into the higher dimensions, we have to understand that there are 3 dimensions that create a dimension. So there's a plasma dimension that is part of matter state as well, capital M matter state, and that would be the plasmatic field. So interestingly enough about Coulomb's law, it's a man-made law, and it actually calculates the amount of force between 2 electrically charged particles at rest. So we know that electrons are always in motion. Energy is always in motion, excuse me. So it isn't at rest, although it appears at rest. And so the rest period is a balanced field, right? So this force that is maintaining this balance is the electric force known as the Coulomb force. And this was published in 1785, a little bit before my time. And it was basically the theory of electromagnetism. And so it allowed meaningful discussions. Thank you very much. Job well done. So when we look at the principal matter interaction, we see these beautiful parcels, energy parcels, carrying energy packs, coming and interacting with our field forces. And as such, and since all of us were born, it's a very good thing that the Earth was here first. It'd be kind of difficult to be born with without the Earth being here. But as we know that the Earth has this Coulomb barrier, so somehow this principal matter interaction broke through the barrier and got to Earth. And somehow we were born and broke through this Coulomb barrier and came to Earth. So we find that energy is always in motion. And of course, being a two-way street, there's two-way transmission and of course, two-way transition. And so the sun has these field forces in motion to maintain its maggrav position, which is a magnetical gravitational relationship, and the Earth as well has that. So when we look at the Earth and being a blue planet, where it's called the water planet, and so it has a certain kind of affinity. And because of that infinity, it can maintain its maggrav condition based on the magnetical and gravitational balance, but it has a unique color, has a unique characteristic, and has a unique set of elements. And these are all based on the negative charge principle, where the negative gives and the positive takes. So we have to understand that you can give and take from yourself, and that creates a binding energy, or you can give and take from others, and that is to say, give to others and take from others, and that energy can be flowing. So we have a lot of control on whether energy is flowing or binding. And of course, there's different points of view. So one of those things is that we have feeding dimensions and we have feedback dimensions. So one dimension is more than two. Not the way we were taught in math. And of course, it involves pi. And pi is kind of, 3 and a bit, so it's hard to calculate, so we'll just fudge it. And then we find that if you're going to have an answer of the 2 dimensions, you have to maintain that. So the first 2 dimensions don't dissolve, don't disappear, they remain. And of course, now we know that one dimension is not the same as the other dimension. This one's the transmission dimension, one's the transition dimension, and the product, of course, is the Z dimension, and all 3 of them create a feedback to us, the observer, because we're none of those 3 dimensions. We're in a 4th dimension. We have to be, because you can't be inside there and see everything. So you have to be out of that. And so here we are on Earth, and we're seeing a gravitational confirmation, how hydrogen is the initial particle or initial element, is the first element on the periodic table of elements. And somehow it got together in Earth and went through that Coulomb barrier to get here. So we can see that the force fields of the sun, which is a balance between the gravitational magnetical force fields, and the force fields of the Earth, which is a balance of the magnetical gravitational force fields, and they interact. But how did they get here as opposed to somewhere else? So we find the gravitational magnetical force fields of the universe assisting in this process. And so now we have the conclusion where we have the arrival of the hydrogen. And we know it's a hydrogen because it also exhibits a color. So the hydrogen gas, of course, is clear, but the fingerprint of the hydrogen represents a color. And that color goes through a spectrum of different colors. And all of these different colors are within this Coulomb barrier. So if we look at the frozen Gans ball here, and we can see the magnetical hair-like lines that are emitted from the core, and we find that these lines are hollow, like nanotubes, but they all emit from the core and they diverge away from the core. So we can conclude that the frozenness of this water is a balance between the magnetical and gravitational field forces, or the gravitational is in the core and the magnetical is in the periphery. And so we started with hydrogen, and then, of course, we ended up creating other products. And interestingly enough, the solar system and the human body share these products, and of particular note are oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and calcium. And so not only are the first 4 part of the amino acid star formation, which is created through a folding deviation, but calcium is represented in every single cell within our body. And there's a connection, and that connection is the carbon spectrum. And so it too has arrived, and it too is gravitational, of course, by the same means as the hydrogen. But it has a color spectrum that is unique. And it has a color spectrum of different colors. And of course, the carbon in the air is not visible, but when the carbon becomes solid, it is visible. So when we look at the other components of the amino acids, they are in a gaseous state. Which is to say that they're transparent, which is to say that they're non-visible. But now we know that there's a physical gas state and there's a plasmatic gas state, which we call GANs. And so as carbon is a solid at room temperature, then these other gases also can become solid at room temperature. So we have different gases of different elements. And since they're all gravitational, the first thing they had to do was break through the Coulomb barrier and then reside on this planet in a gravitational form and then sort themselves out. And so we see this pattern and this folding that happens with the amino acid, and we see this spiral growth, which of course is representative of the spiral coil of the RNA and the DNA. And then, of course, the folding action that is created by the viruses from space. And we see how it manifests into bacteria. And based on the pH of bacteria, if it's alkaline, it supports the host. And if it's acidic, well, it eats the host. And that could be a point of conflict. So the best resolution for this conflict is a point of containment. And so that point of containment then has to be put in some kind of corral. It has to be put inside a fence, inside of containment, right? And so that becomes an energy binding system. And that is very important if we're going to maintain our physical gravitational state. So that binding arrangement has to be very self-serving. And that self-serving binding comes from the universe. But we've changed our practices in our society where we're obtaining this binding energy for self-serving purposes at the expense of others who are also seeking this self-serving energy binding. And so, of course, they're getting robbed in that process. And of course, when you have that on any level, them's fighting words, and it brings together war. So war becomes a very linear type of pH strategy, you know. And as we assemble the armies, we don't want to talk about the disassembly of the armies. And we find out that many warriors discover too late. And so when we're looking at the Coulomb barrier, what we see is that it is a potential energy barrier. And it's given as an electric potential energy. And it has an equation. And what's key about this equation, it talks about the permittivity of free space and the charges of the interacting particles. And it discusses the interaction radius, the radius of the sphere. And so we say that a positive value of the Coulomb barrier is a repulsive force, right? Strong barrier, right? And the interacting particles are at higher energy levels as they get closer. And so the negative potential energy indicates a bound state due to the attractive force, right? So as that force is absorbed gravitationally, the binding increases. And if the energy level decreases, then the repulsive force increases. So we can conclude that the Coulomb barrier increases with the atomic number in the periodic table of elements, which indicates density. And so that's reflected in the equation of as well. And the reference to E is the elementary charge of the energy in motion, right? And so we can change the charge based on the atomic number of the element. And the whole purpose of this, I'm just going to read it. The whole purpose of this is to overcome this barrier. And nuclei have to collide at high velocities, so their kinetic energies drive them close enough for the strong interaction to take place and bind them together. So sometimes, if you're having trouble binding your knowledge with your brain, some people say they need to take you out into the back alley and teach you. So the pH table also reflects a density range. And since gravity seeks density, then we understand that oxygen is more dense than hydrogen. And with the oxygen, you introduce alkalinity. So we find the alkaline is wet and the acid, which is opposite to alkaline, is oily because the oil does not blend with the water. The two are exclusive. And yet the pH always totals 14. So the density range is reflected in the susceptibility. Okay, so let's talk about density then. If density is the attraction, is the result of the attraction of forces, then we say that gravity seeks density. And this density has to operate within the Coulomb barrier. But according to the pH scale, the maggrav is constantly in balance. So how does the density increase as it becomes more gravitational? So it could be through rings, right? And so we know from our light that as close as we get to the core, the frequency is higher. And so when the frequency is higher, it has more energy. So it means when we have more energy, it's more gravitational. Remember, the higher energy feeds the lower energy. So or it could be a spiral. And so as it follows the path of rotation, each time it goes around, It doesn't keep going around the same ring, but it follows a different path, a diminishing path. So each rotation increases the density and thereby increases the gravity. Well, this kind of causes a little bit of a problem, doesn't it? Because eventually you get to the center. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, if we have this mag-grav balance, where is the bag that holds the earth together? We walk on the ground, we breathe the air, and we look up to the sky. And we have to wonder if from the gravitational core, we emit to the magnetosphere. Where does it stop? And why does it stop? I don't see a bag. So if we understand the plasma rule where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, then we have to understand that the higher strength is gravitational, so it's more dense. And this is good because it has more to give. And so the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, and the weaker strength is magnetical, so it needs more to take. And so that becomes the binding zone. And the parameter of the binding zone is the Coulomb barrier. So within that binding zone, we have a mag-grav condition. So that conflict point where we have a magnetical gravitational field force, for one, interacting with the gravitational magnetical field force of another, comes together in the binding zone and goes through a conflict resolution thanks to the Coulomb barrier and maintains its gravitational position within the binding zone and is magnetically confined to the binding zone. And so we operate within this binding zone. So we're talking about the gravitational field forces of attraction, which is the feedback of our environment, and the magnetical field forces of repulsion, which is part of the feeding. And we, as the last man standing, have choices. We can, with respect to the feeding, turn it on and turn it off. With respect to strength, well, yeah, we can increase or decrease. And with respect to positioning, we can enhance or diminish. And these all follow the rules of stronger feeds the weaker, but within the binding field forces as defined by the Coulomb barrier. So within this barrier, we have different strengths. So we have a strong gravitational field force, which gives us this initial potential energy. And then, of course, we have this weak magnetical force, which is the final potential energy. And so when we look at the mag-grav feeding conversion, we see that the Earth, in order to maintain its mag-grav position, right? So the Earth has to maintain its binding force. So the thing that's keeping the Earth together is this Coulomb barrier, and we operate within this Coulomb barrier, and within this ring, we have the absorption through attraction and gravitational field forces of energy coming in and more coming in. And of course, in order to maintain that mag-grav position, we have to have field forces of repulsion being emitted using these magnetical field forces where energy goes out and more goes out. But there's a range. That range is between the magnetosphere and the magmasphere. And then the midpoint, if you will, being the crust. And we walk on the crust. And we can change our position between the surface of the crust or even below the ground and the magnetosphere. And in fact, we can send satellites outside of the magnetosphere. But we remember that these satellites are operating within this bag, this bag we call the Coulomb barrier. And the accumulation inside this bag, it's like going grocery shopping and you keep filling this bag. So somehow this bag has to be able to get bigger because look, we have all these elements on the periodic table of elements. So these are the details of our Earth space range. So what we have to remember is that the atomic number on these details represents what we call the number of protons within the element. But the mass includes the number of neutrons. So we find that when we talk about carbon-6, yes, it has 6 protons, but it also has 6 neutrons and it has a mass of 12. It's not really 12, it's close enough. We're just fudge the number. But nitrogen has 7 protons, 7 neutrons, that's 14, and oxygen has 8 protons and 8 neutrons, that's 16. Hydrogen, oh, wait a second. Hydrogen has 1 proton and no neutrons. Each one of these elements is an element. Elementary. It's an atom. So not all atoms are the same size. They have different mass. That mass is based on mathematical accumulation of the energy within the proton and the neutron. So atoms are uncut, but they are in a MAGRAV condition. And so we know that things are in different sizes because when we eat, regardless of how small you are, always what you eat is smaller. If it's too large, then you have to cut it up. But the atoms are uncut. They have to maintain their magnetic and gravitational relationship, what we call a MAGRAV. So they have an uncut physicality. And yet, as we see in the cover of book number 2, that uncut physicality will split up into 2. Man's universe and the sister of man's universe. So if the atoms are uncut, and if the atoms have a different mass, then the y-axis transition is based on the gravitational field force, because the higher mass represents more density, and more density represents more gravitational, and more gravitational is, if you will, higher pH. And then we have the gap between each of the integers. So at some point 5 and 9 is 14, but at some point 6 and 8 is 14. Which means that if the 5 becomes a 6, the 9 has to become an 8. So that's the uncut physical reality of the susceptibility. So we can see that the MAGRAV position is based on relationships, a balance between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. So when we're looking at the scientific community, they only look at the conservation of magnetic fields versus the conservation of energy. Whereas the spiritual community is looking at the balanced relationship between the spirit and the soul. So these are two different sciences, and the plasma science adds to the knowledge and balances off the relationship between the scientific and the spiritual community, don't you see? And it follows the conservation of energy law of conservation of energy, another man-made law. And so energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be converted from one form of energy to another. Did we say which MAGRAV? Did we say which transmission? And did we say which transition? No, we didn't say. We just said that, there's an initial kinetic energy, which is balanced off by the initial potential energy, and that forms one side of the equation. And then there's the final kinetic energy and the final potential energy. And of course, that too has to be balanced off so that the left side of the equation equals the right side of the equation. Fairly obvious, isn't it? That's what causes balance. And so when we look at the Coulomb symbols, we find that the Coulomb symbol is constant. That's why there's balance. So we can change the relationship, but the energy measure is constant. In electron volts, it's 1.6, yada, yada, 10 to the minus 19th joules. Give or take a few. And then, of course, there's a Coulomb symbol, C, which is a unit of electric charge in the international system. And it is defined by 6.24 times 10 to the 18th E for elementary charge. Nice to know. So we see that the potentiation of strength goes both ways between the initial potential energy and the final kinetic energy. So there has to be a balance, and there's a crossover. So it goes from the strong to the weak, but it has to cross over from the weak to the strong. And so, And in order to do that, we can change our density, which is reflected in our susceptibility, but we have to stay within the Coulomb barrier, which is the pH range of 1 to 14. So that becomes the earthbound barrier, right? And yet here we have this conservation of variability where we have on the one side, we have a variable magnetical force and a variable gravitational force. That makes one side of the equation. And the combination of those two create a magnetical susceptibility. And then we have a variable magnetical and a variable gravitational on the other side. And the combination of those two create a gravitational susceptibility. So that balances off the equation. That's what constitutes the MAGRAV. So the equal balance is the MAGRAV. And that MAGRAV position is an independent variable. if the components on each side of the equation are susceptible, they just have to maintain balance. Then the MAGRAV positioning is also susceptible. And all of this is contained within the Coulomb barrier. So, all of this energy that is coming from the universe in the form of PM ticks, which are magnetical, they arrive and converge into what we call a plasmagen. And then there's a conversion into the principal matter, transition matter, and the matter state. And in the plasmagen world, there's a field interaction, which we call inertia. And so that is what we're looking at in terms of the binding energy forces. So the binding energy forces have to refer to a magnetical and gravitational field forces. You have to have both in order to have a MAGRAV. Hello, that's how it works. And so to have these binding field forces on Earth, we have to stay within the Coulomb barrier. And so when we know that we can go through different energy states, so we know that the lowest energy state is the heat and electricity, and the highest energy state is the plasma state. And then we have, of course, the light matter, the dark matter, and the principal matter, also referred to as the matter state, the nanostate, and the GaN state, and the plasma state. And so we can go and shift through these states along what we call energy transfer states. So all of these states and all the gaps between these states are working within the Coulomb barrier on the state we call Earth space. So when we're looking at these MAGRAV energy transfer states, they involve the transfer of energy from the basic atomic state to the nanostate, to the GaN state, to the plasma state. And then in reverse, from the plasma state down to the GaN state, to the nanostate, down to the atomic state. And in all cases, there's a magnetical gravitational balance we call a MAGRAV. All of these states are part of the matter state, where the plasmatic state is non-visible and the physical state is visible. And so when we say that we are matter state dominant, these matter states are a feedback of our position, our gravitational positioning. And so they become part of the feedback. So, just like you have a fine meal, your feedback is satisfaction. But we also hear sound, see light, feel heat and pressure, admire the luster and superficiality. But within that, as we can see, that we have different densities. So we have a laminar containment as well, right? So the x-axis transmission dimension has to go through a transition, as does the y-axis. But the y-axis transition has to have its own transmission. So this becomes the feedback, and the dominance of the man-made range deviation is dominant to within this Earth space. And so we find there are no microbes in outer space. So these microbes are already quarantined. And so humanity is quarantined in this same Earth space spherical z-axis transition form artifact, often referred to as life. So this quarantine is within this Coulomb barrier. And it's not a bag, and it's not a fence, but it is effective. So all of us as balance seekers, to maintain a balance, we have to construct a form. And so the condition of the acidity is actually alkaline forming, right? We have to cross over. And the alkaline condition is acid forming, right? So we see the white blood cells are targeting specific cell conditions within our body. And it's based on the pH, isn't it? Just like locusts, when they see a crop that is, facing some kind of disaster with respect to its existence, for them, oh, that's a party. And they're just looking for a next disaster waiting to happen. And so we can eradicate pests by affecting the potentiation of the balance, right? Changing the balance by affecting the susceptibility. And so we can create this z-axis polarity shift by understanding that there's an interaction with the x-axis polarity, the y-axis polarity, and the z-axis polarity, and these all affect the transition. And there is no garbage field. They all work together and they all have a function. And we know that because the proof of concept is that there was a preference and sentimentality for us. Yes, we were very, very discriminatory. First of all, we were born, and we were born using the outer space system, and we were born into our inner space, and we were targeting Earth space. And the point we want to make, of course, is that the barrier around our Earth space, the Coulomb barrier, is a two-way system. So if we are setting up a barrier to be contained within our Earth space, then we had to be able somehow to transition through this barrier to get here. And furthermore, we were very discriminatory. We had a preference and sentimentality for Earth space and not Mars space. Why? Because we have a personal Coulomb barrier of our inner space, and it has an affinity for Earth space, not for Mars space, and actually not even Moon space. We kind of drove right by that, didn't we? So what we're saying here is that the Coulomb barrier for the Earth space is not the same as the Coulomb barrier for any other space. So if we have a preference and sentimentality, the nature of this barrier has to be conducive to our inner space. And so either we're going to have to look for a comparable personality of a Coulomb barrier, or we're going to have to adapt to a different barrier. We now have these choices, right? Because you see, we've never been in outer space. What we know is that we know that there's a sun space, and that sun space includes all the planets, and each planet has a space. And some planets have moons, and so these moons have their own space. But there is this space in between, we call it, an in-between space. And see, this is all part of matter state because we can see it. So whether we're within the Coulomb barrier of the Earth space or whether we're in the Coulomb barrier of the sun space, the name may be the same, but what shall we call it? The constant, the energy constant is obviously not the same. Just like the atoms are not the same. Just like the elements are not the same. So when we look at our matter checklist and we say, Okay, we have our Earth space, and that's part of space. And we have our inner space, that's our space within the Earth space. So the Earth space is not in outer space, and our inner space is not in outer space. And so the space between the Earth space and some other space is the in-between space, and neither one of them is part of the outer space. The only time that we can get into outer space is when we are in our dream space. So we believe. But now the dreams can come true. We are able to create, when we look at within our Coulomb barrier on this planet, we can create a mag-grav condition which involves different energy states, right? Or the matter state, small m matter state, the GAN state, the plasma state, the dynamic plasma state. We have physicality and we have plasma reality. So the maintenance of all of these states is within a field. And it stays within that field. There's no bag. And we have more energy coming in. We have confirmation, gravitational confirmation, because here comes oxygen. And it has its own fingerprint. Oxygen is clear, but you know what? That fingerprint is in color. And that color is unique and it has different colors. That's why we know it's oxygen. And it too has the same gravitational affinity. So as we look at these colors and we see that they form this transmission spectrum, right? So we have this transition of visible transmission spectrums, right? In the hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, all the periodic table of elements, a spectrum to spectrum susceptibility. And so what we see is the surface superficiality, which represents physicality. There's an internal substance that's part of the plasma substrate. And so that becomes the point of containment. The balance between the superficiality, which is magnetical, and the plasma substrate, which is gravitational. Because the higher energy feeds the lower energy, and the physicality is at the lowest energy level. So the mag-grav state of our physicality is at the lowest energy state. And so that's within the electromagnetic spectrum, which is in the visible color spectrum. And then on both sides, there's one step beyond. And so if we were to look at a typical spherical transportation unit, and if we did like the rotating hemispheres of the planet, if we decided to partition it and look inside, we can see different elements. And these elements are maintained based on their magnetical gravitational field forces. And so we understand that each element has to maintain its own barrier to maintain its own position. So that barrier is a Coulomb barrier, not the same as the Coulomb barrier of the planet. And as we said, it could represent rings. And at the core, we can see the Gans burst. But each ring represents a different density and thereby a different color. How do we go from one side to the other? Just like the DNA, just like the satellites. every orbit becomes more and more dense until you get to the core. And here we go. One step beyond. We have the Magravs state, which is atomic. And if we go one step beyond, well, that's the nanostate. And the difference is it's monatomic. So one step beyond, down, overlaps the Magrav state. And we understand this overlapping condition because the moon space overlaps the Earth space overlaps the sun space, and all of the planets overlap the in-between space. So we understand the overlapping space, but above the nanostate is another one step beyond the GAN state. But the GAN state is polyatomic. And so it too has an overlapping field state between the nanostate and the GAN state, but now we have a higher state. So all three of these states are in the small m matter state, but the GAN state has an affinity with the plasma state, and that is not atomic. That is in the field. And the plasma state is not the only field, but it can go one step beyond to another plasma state. And then another plasma state. We don't know how many plasma states. Well, we don't know how many GAN states either. We know that each element on the periodic table can be in a GAN state. And we also understand that the nanostate is a monatomic state. And then, of course, there's a Magrav state, which is an atomic state. And every element on the periodic table of elements has a Magrav state, except that there's something missing at the bottom. Right, the Coulomb barrier. Isn't that what keeps the Magrav state in the bag? So when we have, let's say, the GANs of gold, that is within its Magrav state. And we're in the post-Sanya conference state, where now we understand better the new atomic math, where the neutron mass equals the proton mass plus the electron mass. Okay, but we are fudging the mass of the PM ticks plus the total mass of the matter, antimatter, and dark matter, because all of these consist of the totality. And that totality is achieved through the energy level balance and positioning. And we see that we can do energy level balancing within the Coulomb barrier. But now we can break free from the Coulomb barrier by going from our gravitational Earth space to the gravitational some other space. So all we have to do is target our magnetical gravitational reality dimension, which is that focal point between the materialization and dematerialization. And that allows us to target our outer space. So we have to raise our antennas. Because the message is part of the feeding and the feedback manifestation. The two work together as a Magrav. So whatever transmission level we're on, we can change that by tuning the transition levels. And so now we understand that not only does the selection of one force, which is magnetical and is balanced by the force selection of another gravitational force, but we can transcend the transmission states. We can straddle them. And so the resulting selections feed the Magrav manifestation. Oh, we still have to maintain the Magrav positioning. So the selection manifestation is predetermined. And we can do that by choosing peace. And so we need to do this with the peace dome of intention. So the range transition on all the states affects the standard folding deviation, but it leaves no room for war, because otherwise the Coulomb barrier becomes our quarantine barrier. So the z-axis transition balances to and from the peace dome, and that allows us to straddle the various fields and maintain this plasma balance. So we understand that knowledge and wisdom can give you deeper insight, and experience will change a man's perspective. It allows us to reflect on life, and misconduct becomes harder to rationalize. The historical reference becomes meaningless. The pH balance seeking becomes polar balance, and the plasma balance is uncut in any state. So the state dependency is uncut. The state transcendence is uncut, but the visible light is Coulomb bound. So when we're talking about the Magrav state, we can see there's many points on that perspective scale because we can see it. And, you know, when we open up the linear electric motors and we can see the relationship on the rotation of the motors as it might relate to a linear pH scale of motors. But we see that the rotating hemispheres of the Earth, we have a North Pole and we have a South Pole. And yet the curvature of the Earth reflects the linear pH gradient of both hemispheres. And then we see the gradient on our blue planet. This planet has too much bloodletting, and that's turning the planet red. And that's just a stoplight to prevent us from joining the universal community. So the pH of peace has many points on the dove. And that's what we need. So we are now graduated through the second transmutation test. There's two down, 2 to go. We need to practice to break through the Coulomb barrier as it's defined on Earth, and to understand how we can traverse the universe and transition. As this is the end of the Advanced Transition series, we are inviting research teams to join the first cache space plasma research, because we're in the post-March 15th, 2024 era of choices. We have a new selection process to go from that bountiful Earth space through the transmutation space of outer space to balance off that graceful space of our inner space. And that's the ticket. That's the ticket to the greater oneness, transcending the limitations of nuclear science. And we've been teaching that for 551 weeks in a row in the Knowledge Seekers workshops. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. So welcome all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. The World Peace Treaty is a universal peace treaty. Sign it. Sign it with a pen, display it in your place. Be proud and be sincere. Sign it with your soul. So then we find out what causes the transition of the z-axis dimension. And see, is man the reactor of a three-dimensional universe? Oh ho! Can man find heaven through the field transition? Can man go into outer space without a pea stone? No. We know that microbes cannot transition dimensions of history. So we need to show off the transition across barriers to the physical transmission dimensions. And the plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace stone in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of the lesson, and it's the end of the advanced transition series. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Does this mean we graduated?
Stay tuned for the transmutation series.
Oh, there's another step to go, is there? Well, I
Or-
liked what you said, thank you, Alex, about doing it your way and understanding it your way. I know that's really a counter to what we see in the school systems in the university. You're going to teach it this way. They tell to the teachers, and the teachers tell the students, you're going to learn it this way. And many times when you take exception, you don't seem to get a very good grade. And so this is, I like what you said about understanding it your way, because we're all, in a way, we're the same, but we have different emotions and different energies and different backgrounds and ancestry and the rest, even though it is one soul. But this is, in a way, a freedom to allow people to understand it the way they want to understand it until they learn more. And we're all on that pathway. So thank you very much for sharing. Let's see if our participants have anything they'd like to say, or the attendees. Any questions you'd like to raise? I think we'll leave it to the participants. Did you sink all the ships, Alex, or what?
Oh, no, no, no. Everybody is traveling through their densities.
You know, talking about density, you showed the ice formation. And I know I've seen it, other people have demonstrated it in a way, but now I'm thinking if that was more or less bubbles that I was kind of, that got frozen. I know Mr. Kesh talked about be able to show the fields, but using a very quick freeze method down to like -50. I don't know if that was Celsius or Fahrenheit, but apparently you need a quick freeze to really show it. But we've seen it with Gianni and with many others. Again, this is a very interesting freezing the fields to observe them in a way, even though we cannot freeze the fields. Even at absolute zero, there's still things moving around, as I understand it. But it is a beautiful demonstration and a beautiful teaching tool to show these fields going out and coming in.
Well, what we have to understand about this particular picture is that there actually is a Gans ball in the center of it. So the Gans ball is in matter state. Where we are now is we have advanced beyond the matter state. And so this particular picture of force fields in motion, frozen in time, if you will, or frozen in a picture, can be manifest plasmatically. Same picture. This is what's hard for people to understand.
And again, just in a very small space, there must be thousands or millions. I'm sure we don't even see all the fields that are interacting here. There's many, many more probably that we're not able to pick up on. So it's just a huge transfers of and giving and taking of energies happening all the time. This whole universe is alive, very conscious. Go ahead, please, Gail.
Yeah, I just have a question for Alex. I think the one that we see that Mr. Kesh shows has no GANs in the middle, but it has the fields or the soul of the
Right.
GAN. Is that it? So this is different, this one?
This one actually has a Gans ball in the center.
Okay. Yeah,
So
it doesn't look as smooth as the one that Mr. Kesh showed.
So if we were, what's good about this Gans ball, of course, it's kind of representative of our Earth ball because, we have the core and the surface is hard, and then the fields are emanating from that surface, and we walk on that surface. So, but if you were to, say, draw a line around the Gans ball and then draw a line around the perimeter of the plasma field, that is the Coulomb barrier. And so every position from the surface of the ball to the periphery is a spiral rotation increasing in density. In order for it to move from the core to the outer side, it has to reduce density. Or in order to go from the outside to the core, it has to increase density.
And I think when I look at this picture, it seems more apparent that the nanotubes are hollow, if I'm seeing it correctly.
Yes, they are hollow, definitely. Well, let's, what is the instructive point of the hollowness of the nanotubes? How do you create the nanotube? Not with rings, but with spiral growth.
That's almost like the way light in the universe works or travels.
Well, yes, it is. But what the Coulomb barrier has done, and understanding the Coulomb barrier, and I've been refraining from bringing that subject up, but I've kind of had a eureka moment, and this visible spectrum of light is a very narrow band in the transmission spectrum, very narrow. And so everything that we see between the ground and the sky is in the visible color spectrum, everything, right? From the blue water to the blue sky. And once we get beyond the magnetosphere, well, actually, once we get beyond a part of the magnetosphere where we can still orbit, we can see that the sky is dark. What happened to the color? There's no color. What happened to the blue sky? We thought the sky was blue. Well, the sky is blue up to the edge of the Coulomb barrier. Beyond the Coulomb barrier, the sky is of a different color. Well, no color.
Is that the case of it's absorbing all the colors, so then it looks black or not?
Oh, come on, you really had me excited here. Yes, you were correct. No, that's obviously the dark colors, the absorption of all the colors.
I'm still puzzled by the sun. Being told that the sun, let's forget about the earth and the friction interaction of their fields. The sun itself emits sunlight, like a lot of bright light.
The
Is that
visible spectrum.
yeah? Okay, so it is not light. It could even be dark.
It's not in the visible light spectrum.
Okay, so in my thinking, I'm very confused. I think the sun, in a way, might even be a very dark color, but the friction between the earth and the sun's fields, is what gives us the the what do you want to call it? The light spectrum that we can see. Uh, without actually saying it has to be at the left-hand side, it'll be one color, and then you come to the right and it's another color.
Look,
It's
the interaction between the sun and the earth creates the colors.
yes.
And there's a difference in the colors. So we know
Yeah.
that it is more dense than the red.
Mm-hmm.
So the blue is gravitational, the red is magnetical.
Alex, is space always black?
But is space always black? Depends on where you are. If you're within a field, then you'll have to determine what the field strength is. But if you're in between fields, then as far as the solar system is concerned, all of the colors are gravitated towards the planets. So the in-between space is black, but you can see the planets. So the planets are interacting with the sun, and you can see those colors. So as you go outside of the magnetosphere, you see the true color of the space, but that space is the solar system space. So you can still see the color of the planets, you can still see the color of the sun, you can still see the stars, and that's because our magnetosphere is translucent, which means it's transparent to the light. So the light that we see is actually a reflection of the interaction of the Earth space. And once we get out of that, once we break through that Coulomb barrier where we are no longer within the Earth space reflection zone, we are now within the solar space, the sun space reflection zone.
And I know I was reading in book 1 about the dark energies, or the transitional matter, as we call it, or
Exactly.
matters. And this is one of the reasons that the universe is dark, on the darker side, because there's a balance. There's no light. There is small bits of light being created, but it's below our perception. So by all the fields being in balance, there's no scintillation, if we could call it that, to create that visible light. Everything is in balance.
I bow 10 times to your knowledge.
Say what?
I bow 10 times to your knowledge.
Oh, I thought I was doing good at 1/100000th, 1/100000th of 1/100000th of 1%, but Mr. Kesh in the last teaching said we haven't even contemplated 1/10000000th of what these things mean.
I know you're so modest, but I mean, you just, you spoke the words.
It's from the book. I'm just basically paraphrasing what I read in the book and not
Yeah, but you
accurately,
understand
totally.
what you read. It's nice for you to paraphrase it because it implies that you understand it. Otherwise, you wouldn't reference it at all. You have to give yourself credit. This is the
Mhm.
thing that I
Yeah.
keep harping on.
Mhm.
You do have the knowledge. The
Well,
knowledge is
we all have the knowledge. It's just a matter of tapping in. We all have the knowledge.
yes, and also having the confidence. Okay, so it's just that, if you look at this picture and you say, well, wait a second, so this is the universe? Well, what's beyond? And it looks kind of dark. Well, why is that dark? Because, like you said, we do not have the capability of seeing what is there.
Right.
We
Yeah.
don't have the right equipment. So what we see is a reflection that actually is matching our equipment.
Right. This is what he's talked about, the night vision. Before that, everything looked basically black. And we've added in the night vision, and now all of a sudden, many, many more things appear in the night sky or in the forest or wherever you're perhaps looking. We didn't
So
have that before, but now we do. And again, it's just something similar to what will happen to the telescopes and other viewing instruments, I think, of the universe. It's going to appear to be quite a crowded place, as he said.
yeah, but this is why I get excited by what you're saying, is because now we're looking at the genuine practical applications of our knowledge.
So you're saying take a flashlight with you when you go? Just having fun, as you said.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Alex, question. Yeah, going back to the teaching last time with Mr. Cash, that apparent knowledge bank where we all can deposit knowledge, and if the field strength matches, somebody else can pick from it. Is it only good knowledge, or could anything bad be deposited? And then if it matches, somebody can replicate that.
Yes, yes, it can be bad, and it's not part of the creation, it's part of the interpretation of the knowledge. And so that's the difference between the universal law and the man-made law. So, we are quarantined here because we're not obeying universal law, and we insist on imposing man-made law. So, we're dictating to the universe how it works. Well, in order to understand how the universe works, the dog wags the tail, not the tail wagging the dog. So the higher strength feeds the lower strength. So obviously the body of the dog is bigger than the tail. So, am I saying something that's ridiculously obvious? Well, yeah, we have to understand the relationship between the gravitational and magnetical field forces. The dog and the tail are part of the magnetical and gravitational interaction. So the whole body of the dog becomes a maggrav, and it includes the tail. So the question then becomes, is as we become more and more dense, we come to the core. And then what happens? If we all come to the core, what they say in the nuclear world, when you bring everything to the core simultaneously, there's a convergence of energy that is so large that it creates a nuclear explosion. So is that how the universe is created? Through an explosion? Is that how, what does Coulomb say? Oh, we have to bring things together and have things crash together so that they will bind. There are actually people who do this. Oh, no, that's not the one. Oh, find it. Oh, yeah, here we are. What does we say? We have these kinetic energies, right? Energy and motion, drive them close enough for the strong interaction to take place. Oh, you have two boxers in a ring. Okay, so the handlers have to get behind the boxers and kind of push them to the center of the ring so that a binding can happen, a strong interaction. That's a philosophy based on conflict. And this philosophy goes back to 1785.
So
Interesting.
Alex,
Oops, go ahead.
oh,
Yes.
does that mean that any of our nuclear explosion information is something that would be recorded as well? I somehow feel like certain things would be meaningless and wouldn't really be recorded as information to use. It
Well,
might be like a history book, but maybe not practical,
okay, so we know that Hiroshima was not the first nuclear bomb dropped on this planet,
right?
right? We know that. We know when they excavated the 9 civilizations in Babylon at the bottom of the ninth. Okay, so that's 9 levels down. They discovered the same green crystals that they discovered at Alamogordo, New Mexico, when they did the nuclear testing, right? So we can see in New Mexico these crystals, but they're on the surface of the ground, and we know they were caused by the nuclear explosion. Well, how do these green crystals manifest, 9 civilizations down in Babylon? So that means if you understand why does the surface of the pyramids, why are they so ragged? They suffered a nuclear explosion. That's like if it's obvious, if I buy a nice new car, and it has a nice shiny paint job, it's going to be, nice and shiny. And then if I come with all sorts of scratches and dents and stuff like that, then I know there's been an accident. Okay, so a good detective can tell the difference, that the pyramids were not constructed with advanced technology with such high precision and come up with such a motley surface. You say, well, I built this beautiful pyramid and then I got a bunch of grade 3 students in to do the finish. You would expect the finish of the pyramids to have the same meticulous care as the foundation of the pyramids, would you not? So who has explained what causes that? So, if you look at the Lost Book of Enki, you see that there was an explosion. So what does that mean? What does that mean about Hiroshima? Directly to your question, Gail, it's not the first nuclear explosion. It's the first nuclear explosion by earthbound humanity. And the universal community heard this loud and clear. You know what that means? That means the kids are playing with matches. You can't let them burn the house down, can you?
Are you saying that the 9th level down was not done by Earthlings, shall we say?
I'm not going to answer that question.
Okay, no, that's fine. I got it. I mean, it could have been beings who had the wrong thinking, let's say, who got out after their deaths and spread it all around. We don't know.
Yeah, but you know, when did that happen?
We don't know. It could be way back.
Well, what don't we know? Well, what don't we don't know? You know, if you look at the some calendars, they go back what roughly 5,500 years. Okay, so history went back 5,500 years, and then what? Oh yes, that and then we fell off the edge of the flat Earth. Well, so you know, I ask this, how did we get on the flat Earth? If we can fall off the flat Earth, how do we climb back onto it? And then history begins at that particular point. Like really? Well, what was
Exactly.
you know? I mean, history is his story, and his story is the story of the victor. That's what it is.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Alex,
yes, John.
yeah, don't forget the Mayan calendar. It has 26,000.
Well, I was looking at my watch, John, and you know, I passed Aquarius. I think it's getting late. Who keeps
Well,
track? Who keeps track of 2,600 years? Who is that?
our Adam,
26,000 years, the Mayans.
Yeah, well, who keeps track of that? Like, forget it. It's over 100. Who keeps track of that? You know, I'm trying to keep track of this meeting. I had to be here, you know, at a certain time, you know, and you know, when I say what time is it, I don't talk about years. I talk about hours and minutes.
Yep.
And if I'm racing a car, I'm talking about seconds and split seconds.
and with the new method of dating things, I think makes us realize that the dating that has gone on is very small compared to what actually is. We have Adam's calendar in Limpopo province here, and apparently it's around 70,000 years old. But now with the new dating, I'm wondering if it isn't a whole lot more. We'll see.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've been hearing a little, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
No, I was listening to some of the teachings of the Hermetica, which is from Hermes. Again, another mythical, supposedly mythical character, the son
the
of Thoth.
architect of the pyramids. Yeah, okay, carry on.
The son of Thoth, and that was another one, the man with the ibis head and the body of the man, a water bird called an ibis. And apparently he was the, in a way, shared wisdom with a lot. But getting back to this hermetical things, it's interesting that the science thousands and thousands of years ago for most people was alchemy, astrology, and
Yeah.
magic. And aren't we almost coming full circle? Of course, Mr. Kesh says he doesn't do magic. His knowledge is his magic. And if you understand it, you become magician too. course, astrology was where they thought the stars or different planets were angels and they moved into different positions and created different energies. And isn't this the alchemy we're also doing, the transmutation of elements in a way? Changing the CO2 from a gas into a solid, isn't that in a way, a transmutation? Making again, a nano of itself and appearing as a solid in the matter state. So it seems to me we're going in a way full circle back to these basic alchemy, working of the universe, and what we would call, or they called back then, magic, because they didn't understand it. This is what they said about Mr. Kesh: you do magic. He says, no, I don't do magic.
But Mark,
And the knowledge.
as an architect, you always, for an important edifice, you incorporate a cornerstone, right? So the cornerstone of the pyramids is a lion. When you look at the cornerstones in other historical context, you see the bull, you see the ram, and you see the fish and the water bearer. These are the cornerstones now. So part of that 26,000 year cycle that John was talking about is represented by the cornerstones of the zodiac. So that's the telltale sign. So you don't need to do carbon dating. What you need to do is to do rotation progression through the universe, which we've done with the computers. And so we know chronologically exactly when the pyramids were built. And they were built in the zodiac sign of Leo.
I think there's a lot of books to open up. We don't use many formulas, Alex, but we use the one, I think it's in book 1, about gravitational minus the magnetical fields equals the structure. I've always had this question: is it better to give first and then receive, or is it better to receive and then give? Because if you minus the magnetical fields, if you want to maintain your structure, wouldn't you, just the way the neutron works, does it split before it takes the energy it needs to split? Does it give before it takes?
Of course it has to, the neutron has to take before it gives.
And this is what he said about the Alex beads as well. It has to take before it gives. Otherwise, you've changed the structure.
Yeah, but now you've got a maggrav. And in order to maintain that maggrav position, you have to give. So you have to give before you receive. Just think about it. If you're buying new furniture for your house, if you don't give away the old furniture, you won't have room for the new furniture. A very crude example, very appropriate.
Okay, but what I'm saying, if you want to maintain a structure, you have to take and then give what you don't need. This is the way I'm looking at it now. I'm not saying I'm correct, but just as the way I'm looking at it.
Well, you're trying to work it out logically. So, let's carry on with that. But, between the surface of the planet and between the magnetosphere, we operate as humanity. And each of us is different. So if you take away, what did you say? Subtract the magnetical from the gravitational, you end up with the structure?
Correct.
Okay, so humanity is the structure. And so humanity operates within the Coulomb barrier of the Earth space. And the Coulomb barrier has different densities. Each density has its own strength. So all of the densities between the core of the Earth and the magnetosphere are part of this Coulomb barrier. So you can navigate within this Coulomb barrier to whichever density you want. So you can go by boat, you can go on foot, you can go under the ground, you can go in a plane, all different densities, and you can do that within the Coulomb barrier. And you will stay within the field known as Earth space.
Right, but let's say your structure is 100 and you want to maintain that 100. Wouldn't you, in other words, if you give, now you've collapsed that structure or started to weaken that structure. So I would think you need to take, and now you have 103. So now you'll give the 3 because you don't need it. And you're still maintaining your structure.
If you want to maintain your structure at 100, you can't go above 100. You have to make room. So you have to give and then take, and it happens at the same time. So the giving is magnetical, the taking is gravitational, and there's your balance. So the giving and taking is in balance. The Magravs condition of your structure is in balance.
But you're
Both have,
saying the neutron doesn't behave that way. It has to take first.
because the neutron comes together from the principal matter. One of the very first videos in the new channel.
Unless they are women take first.
Because they have the child, according to humanity. But then the neutron will, I call it destruct, when the magnetosphere of the neutron can no longer hold all the new energies that it has absorbed.
And then it gives, it splits. Wouldn't the process be the same throughout the universe?
Well, I think Alex is trying to tell us something here because the Earth, well, I mean, we're gaining more and more humanity. But in a way, we have expanded. We didn't explode.
Right. And we didn't destruct. So the giving of the neutron, which was so the nuclear decay, the plasma dilution, if you will, the creation of the PM tick and the electron-proton combination does not lead to the demise of the neutron. It allows the exchange of energy. So the range that the neutron can expand or collapse to, which is to adjust its density, is within the Coulomb barrier of the Magravs field of the neutron. And I'm only saying Coulomb barrier as a reference, not a Coulomb barrier as a specific number, as an electron volt or something like that. That's not the reference. What I'm referencing to is that there is a field that is holding the neutron together, and it can expand and contract within that field. Just like, you can expand and contract. I mean, as you breathe, don't you expand your chest? And as you exhale, you contract your chest. Okay, so you are doing that within the confinement of the Earth space. So you have that capability of expanding and contracting. And so you're giving and taking energy, but you're not going through a demise and you're not going through a rebirth. You're going through a ongoing energy transaction. So energy is always in motion. So you have to keep it in motion because you can't stop it. It keeps coming and coming and coming, so that this field is going to grow. And then it's going to come to the point beyond its MAGRAV balance position. So it's going to have to give so that they can carry on.
Right. Do you have that picture of the universe dividing into the smaller universe and the larger universe? Would you think that universe didn't take energy and then divide, or did it divide first and then took the energy later? You know the picture you show from the book?
Oh, yes, yes. Now I know what you're
Let's just
talking about.
take a quick look at that.
Coming from the principal fields.
Okay. So here we have origin of the universe. We have a universe, and then it would seem to me it's taken in enough energy that it can now give, and it creates the smaller and a bigger universe out of itself. I wouldn't think it could do that unless it took the energy within its structure first to be able to split, very similar to what we see with the neutron, splitting into electron and proton. And a lot of PM-tics as well and other things. But it
And
would
it-
seem it has to take before it gives. If it didn't, it would collapse its structure. Just a curious point for me.
Yeah, but to Gail's point, does it necessitate the demise of the neutron?
Of course not. No.
So when you look at the GANs, and you know that the GANs has an affinity to give and take, and that the GANs is enduring. So if it's giving energy, how come it doesn't go through this demise that you're looking at on this picture? Because it's taking at the same time. So the GANs acts as a catalyst. So this origin of the universe is the same thing. What is, if the creation of the sister universe and the creation of man's universe came from an origin, and that origin went into a demise, then there's no sustainability for man's universe and the sister universe. There's nothing to sustain it, because that which gave it life has been extinguished.
Right. Back to my example. I'm at 100. I want to maintain the 100 structure, but I want to give 1,000,000. Wouldn't I have to take 1,000,000 in order to give the 1,000,000 and still maintain my structure?
You have
It's just a point to discuss.
no, not just a point, it is the point. So
But
when,
Mark, you can't take excess. You take what you need. So your capacity cannot go beyond what you are capable. That's the plasma law.
beautiful, beautiful, that was well said. But to your point, Mark, so you're 100. Okay, so now you want to give 1,000,000. Well, why don't you just share that with everybody else and bring a dynamic plasma reactor together? So instead of saying, oh, I'm just going to bring that one guy in and I'm going to do all the jobs, why don't you say, why don't we all work together and make it happen? So this is why we need more people on this planet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have to be 1,000,000. I could do it 1,000 times with 1,000, couldn't I?
Or how about this? How about a plasma reactor, a star formation? So if each one is one, so Mark, you could be in any position on these four here, right? And then collectively, these four create a dynamic plasma in the core, which is gravitational now, right? So you have 5 points. Now, if you were to take 4 of these and put them in a star formation, you've just increased by order of magnitude the dynamic plasma state, haven't you?
I don't know if I've ever done it before, but it would seem, yes, this is what we're gonna play at the end, the free plasma key to the universe.
If you're pulling on a rope and you're having resistance and you ask your buddy to help you, now there's the two of you pulling on the rope and you still can't do it, well, maybe you need another two buddies. So the four of you pull, and guess what? Things start moving. So that's why 1 and 1 is more than 2, right? Because every time you added 1, nothing changed until you got to the fourth buddy there. And then the fourth buddy, and all of a sudden things changed. Well, that change is dynamic. That change is a manifestation of growth.
Sounds good to me.
What was that? A grunt from Gail?
No, no, not from me. I think maybe Ike, I'm not sure. Maybe laughing, but the only thing that keeps coming to my mind is the magnetosphere is kind of key. And that's why I was saying it sounds like we are able to increase our magnetosphere without bursting out. And somehow there's some balance, but I'm not sure how that works. And then the other thing is, if you look at that picture you showed where the sister universe and man's universe, in between, it looks like a free plasma as well. And I thought that was very, very interesting.
Yeah, but the difference is that that particular picture shows the demise of that energy. If you were to take this plasma reactor and put it on that picture, then you would still create the man's universe, which is a representation of an electron, and the sister universe, which is a representation of a proton, because you have to have one and the other. You have
Yes.
both.
Yeah.
But if you put this dynamic plasma reactor in that center position, then you would have a continuous feeding.
Okay. But I still run into the issue of, at some point, if the magnetosphere of the whichever being we're talking about does become stressed to the point where it will give off the PM ticks and all the other, and the proton and the electron. So how, I mean, our Earth obviously has been very good at holding our state. And at some point, I mean, either we get drawn into the sun or we would explode into the proton neutron state, another sister universe and another man's universe.
Well, how does a pregnancy work? Does the woman give birth at month 1, month 2, month 3, or does it continue to take energies and feed the fetus even more in the final months or the final 30 days? Continues taking energies, and then you have the birth of the new child. But if it did it before then, it would be premature. It wouldn't be complete. So the mother has to keep taking energies until that structure is ready to come out, or like a division, if you want to call it that. Just an example for me about the taking and the giving. I think the women here would be more capable of answering that because they've probably gone through that process.
Yeah, but that's an excellent example, isn't it? So the conformity of the body has to adjust physically to accommodate the child.
Same with the neutron. It gets pregnant. I mean, it's taking in more energy to be able to do the division, the splitting.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, that's amazing.
Now, another thought I had was Mr. Kesh taking us into the universe in the dimension of energy, and therefore we wouldn't have a mouth to eat any other creatures, and or arms to kill any other creatures. We're in this dimension of energy. But then I was thinking what you said, Alex, about how this loosed harvesting, I think we could still offend in the dimension of energy, because you can take another entity's energies and deplete that other entity just through the energy transfer by taking more than you need. So I know we're going to go in the physicality as well, but this whole idea of the loose harvesting, even in the dimension, which we do here in the dimension of energy, I don't think it has physicality. Does loose harvesting have physicality, Alex? Or is it all on the energy dimension?
Well, the loose harvesting is on the energy dimension. I mean, that's what it's all about. But there is a physical manifestation of the consequences. It's just that on this planet we have a delay in consequences. But you know, to your question with respect to being able to go beyond the Earth space and go into the universal community and carry on with this delinquency. No, we cannot do that because we will not go through the Coulomb barrier to go into outer space with that kind of conduct. Not possible. It is not possible.
Right.
But Alex, didn't Mr. Kesh say we had to be careful because some entities are very, very strong and we have to know not to engage?
Correct.
How do we know?
How do we know?
Before it's too late.
Well, it's the same way to know that, you know, in order to understand if someone is lying, you don't listen to the words, you listen to their intention. This was a dramatic problem for me because then, you know, once I figured out that how to discern that they were lying to me, then the onus was on me to pretend that I believed them. So why am I having to accommodate for their delinquency? Well, because if I call them out and say, oh, you know, you're a liar, well, that's going to be a point of conflict right there, right? And so it's not my intention to have a conflict. And so if you want to avoid conflict, then you have to have proper conduct. So just because you're lying and you think you're getting away with it, well, no, you're not, because in terms of energy flow, energy is flowing through all the dimensions, the visible and the non-visible. And there's a balance of magnetic gravitational field forces to accommodate that. So just because you're looking at the physical nature of it, it doesn't mean that there's no plasmatic substrate, and you have to take that into account, and liars ignore that.
Unless you have to accommodate because plasma accommodates. So there's no need to question it. If they are lying, their lie could be their truth. So as they move, plasma adjusts. So you unconsciously adjusting is not a question of why are you adjusting for their own deficiencies, because from your perspective, it's a lie, but from their perspective, it could be their truth.
Yeah, but I'm not going to give energy to their lie. So this is why there's no conflict in the universe. So if you want to go into outer space and you want to go to your new space, some space, there will be no collisions, because that's how the universe works. Within the nearness and proximity of the Earth space, we still have these issues. But now if we can, because as you can see, we can take a rocket from Earth space and go into the in-between space, right? But that transition from the Earth space to the in-between space is still in the physical space. It's not in outer space. Outer space is the way we were born. Outer space is the way creation happens. So, you know, the Earth space wasn't created by us. The Earth space was created before us. And so when we had the MAGRAV field within us, and we had an affinity with the MAGRAV field of the Earth, that's how we were born. Without that affinity, we'd have gone to Mars or Jupiter.
Right. I have another question, Alex. During the teaching, Mr. Cash mentioned that you could, the only way to get in the spacecraft, you have to transmute. So
Right.
apparently, it's not a physical, tangible spacecraft. Now, do we consider that as energy dimension? So in the law of plasma, there's still different structures. There's a physicality, there's transition, and there's energy. And each of these dimensions, they still have the same three. So if the craft is not tangible, how is it supposed to be a craft that has a containment, which is not physical?
Well, when you go to sleep and your soul goes traveling, so it doesn't, you know, maybe we think, well, when we start opening our mouth, the soul will escape through our mouth. When the soul comes back in the morning, it picks up its position within our, you know, our brain. There's no door, there's no hole, there's no hanger, you know. So it's exactly like what you've described. So we do this every day. So in other words, our soul is traveling in outer space every day. But, you know, we only recognize it when it's doing that in our dream space, which is what we do, you know, when we go to sleep. So now we understand that we can do this around the clock, daytime, nighttime, doesn't matter. And we have always had this ability, but we have forgotten. We have reinforcement that says that we can't do it. And so with the new plasma science, it is now supplementing that reinforcement to show that we can do it. And we know we have the proof of concept because now we can create gold in them Tar Hills.
So Alex, that means that we're able to envelop our physicality then with our soul,
Exactly.
and then we can enter. Okay. Transmute.
Okay, I'm going to take the screen, Alex. Anyone else want to say anything else or share anything else?
May
Or
I
ask
just
another question, please? Go ahead.
may I just reinforce one thing that Gail just said? Okay, so our position is a MAGRAV position. And if we want to transmute, we have to seek another MAGRAV position. That's what it takes to go through the Coulomb barrier. Until we have that, Until we can do that in the plasmatic state, the way Gail described, then we are within this field. So if we want to go to another field, we have to have an affinity for that other field so that there are no accidents. Thanks very much, everybody, for allowing me to produce this transition series. Has been very exciting for me, and I really I'm grateful that I've been able to continue with this. So thanks very much, Mark. I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay, anyone else have something to share? Let's just take this here.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Pleasure.
I can say this is better than going to church.
Yes, I think if you believed in any of this stuff, if it was 1,000 years ago, I think you know what's going to happen to you. And of course, this is what they did to the Gnostics and the others, and many people who had certain knowledges that they didn't want out in the market, or people even contemplating that. But
Right.
eventually it will come around, as he said. It's just a matter of time. Their cycle is 1 billion years, ours is 100. So it's already been established and written, and the wishes have been made, and so we'll see. Of course, again, this is to all of you. May you be proud of the work you do, and may you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you make. And I think helping with the new YouTube channel will help reinforce your work. And of course, you'll gain quite a bit of knowledge. Then applying the ethos of Mitra with the 3 wise men, the thinking, speaking, and doing good, creates a huge shielding for you, and I think quite a lot of help. And also, I believe you're giving by not taking from a person and thinking good about them or elevating them. This is a very positive move, and positive for you as well. As you nourish the others, you become nourished. So whether it's thinking, whether it's speaking, or whether it's acting, it all applies in the same way. So this is another revelation by Mr. Kesh, which he told us in the beginning. All the Christians missed these gifts of the 3 wise men. It wasn't the incense or the myrrh or gold or anything else. It was the thinking, speaking, and acting. This is the ethos of Mitra, and now we can create the child of Mitra, as he indicated, and we can learn from that child. So it's up to each of you to, in a way, contemplate this and start on that path of creating children in the dimension of energy rather than in the dimension of physicality. And you can love it just as equally and even learn from it and probably elevate to that position. It's amazing that you can create something out of yourself better than yourself. So this is just an amazing understanding. Because the child of Mitra won't kill, won't harm, and all the rest. And as Ike said, it'll be loved by every creature. So we continue as our collective work, and thank you for carrying all of you for carrying a small corner of this very large carpet. I'm going to play the free plasma, which is another offering on the plasma storyline on the new YouTube channel. And Lisbeth is just joining us. We're just about to close, but let's give Lisbeth an opportunity to deliver a message or to say something to us, if you'd like to. Lizzie? I know you've just come in and you may not be prepared, so we won't put you on the spot.
Hello. No, I'm sorry. Only at that moment come, so
Yes.
I don't know, maybe it's time for finish, I don't know.
Yes, we're just closing. And of course,
Oh.
your message would be to join the One Planet, One Nation, One Race on Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay, only invite all people appear in One Nation, One Planet, One Race, and weekly and daily, I'm sorry, 21 hours daily. Please unify your soul with us for all you wish about the peace, because we are the soul of the peace. But I intend to talk with anybody, please. You remember that every 3 hours you do that. You unify your soul with the distance and elevate the old souls. Because when you build the peace, all the people is possible build the peace. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
We are the soul of the peace. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for dropping in. Nice to have all of us here. And I'm sure we're going to get closer and understand each other better and expand the community. This is just a natural progression. No matter what anyone's saying, it's already been written and it's being delivered. So little glitch here and there, but these things will be corrected and ironed out, and what has been promised will manifest itself. Thank you all again for being part of this process. As he said, we're all holding that very small piece of a very large carpet. So we are the KAKT Foundation. It's just not one anymore.